Hello, my name is Tony. This is about as close to a romantic feel-good movie as I'm ever likely to get, so make the fucking most of it. It's 1979, and just as I was contemplating and cursing the lack of daring and creativity in mainstream American cinema, Time After Time was released and the magic of the movies came surging back to me, in a way and for a while at any rate. It's an unlikely pitch. First, an original screenplay based on 55 pages of an incomplete and unpublished novel. A first-time director who wrote the aforementioned script. Then, get this, it's a story about Jack the Ripper using a time machine built by H.G. Wells to escape into the future of San Francisco circa 1979 to continue his killing spree. Wells follows him through time, and it diversifies into a love story between him and a very modern American woman who works in a bank. Both become enmeshed in a cat-and-mouse game with Jack to stop him ripping women. Whichever executive at Warner listened to the pitch and greenlit the film must have snorted industrial amounts of pharmaceutical cocaine that day. Yeah, baby, that's a sort of film we want to make. Where's my Charlie? More Charlie! Time After Time was the hybrid child of a lot of elements and influences. I'll whack through a few. The Jack the Ripper murders in the London of 1888. The Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes novels and stories. The life, social and scientific theories of H.G. Wells and his novel The Time Machine, published in 1895. The George Powell Hollywood movie of The Time Machine from 1960. And one, maybe even two short stories by Robert Psycho Bloch and Harlan Ellison, respectively. Bloch's 1967 short story A Toy for Juliet sees a Victorian Englishman abducted from his time period by a time traveller and transported to the future as a gift for his granddaughter Juliet. Juliet tortures and kills such abductees in her sexually depraved games. Only this time the gift she's been given gives something worse back. Turns out he's Jack the Ripper. Big oops. Ellison wrote a more narratively and psychologically complex sequel to the story, The Prowler in the City at the Edge of the World. Both works appeared in the Ellison-edited sci-fi anthology Dangerous Visions. And as if that wasn't enough influences to be going on with, you won't fail to note the film's significant nod to Leone's for a few dollars more. Yeah, that's right, spaghetti and sci-fi. Yum. I think one could add the classic Star Trek episode from 1967, Wolf in the Fold, also written by Robert Bloch. It's another Jack the Ripper in the future example, only this time Jack is a disembodied primal entity, described as a hunger that never dies, which takes over the minds and bodies of others and drives them to kill. The implication being that this is what happened in Victorian London until the entity moved on to elsewhere in the infinite vastness of space. You might question the relevance of my including it, and I wouldn't blame you, but my reasoning will become clear later. Well, you know. It's 1893 in fog-swathed London, and Jack the Ripper is still going about his gruesome business, claiming yet another hapless victim. At the home of H.G. Wells, Malcolm McDowell, he's got his chums round for a little supper and brandy slugging. Arriving late is his final guest, Surgeon John Leslie Stevenson, David Warner. Wells announces that he's going away and shows his mates the time machine he has built in the basement. They're skeptical, but Wells insists he is going to travel into the future, where he predicts mankind and society will have evolved into some wonderful peace-loving utopian paradise. He's very idealistic, is Herbert, fucking hippie. He gives them a brief rundown of how the machine operates, at which point the police arrive chasing down Jack the Ripper, who has struck again and is thought to be in the neighbourhood. They want to search the house, and in so doing find Stevenson's Gladstone bag and a pair of bloodied gloves within. Stevenson is nowhere to be found. Reeling from this revelation, the guests leave, and Wells wonders just how Stevenson was able to elude the police and leave the house undetected. He's only gone and used Wells' time machine, which is no longer in the basement. Soon though it rematerializes, because it's been designed to automatically return to its point of origin. Wells is appalled that he has set spring-heeled Jack loose on his predicted utopian future Earth. Scooping up some money and jewellery, he too launches into the future, ending up in a museum in San Francisco in 1979. Why a museum in San Francisco? Well, it's hosting a H.G. Wells exhibition, and that's where his non-functioning time machine is, recently unearthed from the ruins of a house in London and shipped over for the show. Wells is by turns dazzled, astonished, awestruck, repelled and disappointed at the noisy, crowded, mechanised and fast-moving metropolis he finds before him. Adrift, out of place, he wanders around until he hits on a branch of the Chartered Bank of London. His reasoning is that, like him, Stevenson would need modern money to operate and survive, and would seek to exchange his old currency for new. He meets Amy, Mary Steenburgen, Bergen, who runs the foreign exchange desk. She is instantly enchanted by this polite, sweet and utterly guileless English gentleman, and there is an immediate attraction. She confirms that Stevenson has indeed been there, exchanging gold guineas for dollars, and advises Wells that she recommended a hotel, the Wyatt Hilton, where he could stay. The hunt is on, made all the more pressing by media reports of a spate of violent slayings of women in the city. The Ripper is ripping again, and Wells needs to stop him. What could have been a trashy B-movie horror flick defies convention to deliver a delightful, whimsical, stimulating and imaginative concoction that uses smart detail and creativity to form a unique and appealing creation. Writer-director Nicholas Meyer, a film fan and avid Sherlock Holmes buff, hit the ground running with a clear vision of what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. He previously wrote the Sherlock Holmes novel The 7% Solution in 1974 and adapted it into a screenplay for the 1976 movie version with Nicole Williamson and Alan Arkin. He would go on to write and publish 4 more Holmes novels to date, as well as writing and directing for the Star Trek movie franchise. It's the minor things, the attention to detail, the stylistic flourishes and organic progression of the narrative that draws the viewer in and entertains so cleverly. Here's why it's so damn good. It manages to be both gruesome and grisly, but in a restrained and curiously tasteful way, suggesting rather than showing. The earlier Victorian London scenes resonate with period atmosphere. When Jack lures a prostitute into an alleyway, there is no explicit or graphic hack and slash, just a close-up of her face as her eyes widen in shock at the rending, tearing sound of cloth and flesh being violated by a blade. Jack also opens a pocket watch when he kills, which has a cameo picture of a woman inside and plays a haunting tune. The mystery of who the woman is remains unsolved throughout, but the item itself is a direct reference to Leonie's for a few dollars more. Later, when Jack cuts the throat of a victim in her apartment in future San Francisco, we don't see the gory specifics of the murder, just a splash of blood hitting below the corner of Stevenson's eye, a rivulet of which runs down his face like a tear. It is a dreadful and morbidly poignant moment. There are references to Sherlock Holmes peppered throughout. Wells tells a police detective called Gregson, the name of a character from the original Conan Doyle stories, that he is a detective from Scotland Yard and his name is Sherlock Holmes, which immediately causes the police to believe he is a fantasist. Wells never imagined that Sherlock Holmes would still be a household name all these years into the future. The play on the fish out of water, man out of time concept is deftly handled with a bit of a twist. Expectations that the open-minded, progressive social theorist and scientist would be a better fit for the future San Francisco are flipped. Wells is unsettled and out of sorts, while Stevenson revels in the violence, chaos and warfare prevalent in this brave new world. He assimilates with ease, blending in. When Wells finds him and tells him, "We have to go home," Stevenson responds with, "I am home." Some of the plot devices jar a little, but not enough to derail the smooth running of the narrative. The time machine won't operate without a key that Wells has in his possession. Stevenson, realizing that at some point the authorities will close in, needs to get it so that in any event he can escape into another time and keep killing indiscriminately. On the outer shell of the time machine, another key is situated, a vaporizing equalizer, designed to stabilize both man and machine when in flight. Without it, the traveler would be dematerialized and streamed into infinity. Those suspecting this plot mechanic will crop up as a Deus Ex Machina element at some stage in the proceedings are pretty much on the money. In the overall scheme of things though, these are really petty minor issues, easy to accept and go along with. The romance between Wells and Amy, Victorian anachronism and 70s feminist career woman, is warm, heartfelt and plausible, handled with thought and sensitivity by Meyer, pleasingly infused with gentle humour. He convinces Amy that he has travelled through time by taking her 3 days into the future in his machine. On picking up a newspaper, both are shocked and horrified to read that Amy has been the 5th murder victim of the serial killer. They travel back and prepare to fix things. This turn of events adds a sense of urgency and suspense to the proceedings, posing the question, is it possible to change one's destiny? As it turns out, it's Amy's friend who has been the victim. She'd been invited around to meet Wells, who'd been detained by the police. They just assume the dismembered corpse is Amy. Amy. She, however, is Stevenson's hostage. He takes the key from Wells, reneging on an agreement to release Amy, and races to the museum holding her at knife point. In the climax, Wells confronts Stevenson at the museum. He pleads for Amy's life, but Stevenson, holding a blade to her throat, decides to kill her regardless, as though he can't help himself. Mercy and compassion simply not in his nature. His pocket watch proves his undoing, snagging on the time machine, giving Amy the opportunity to break free. Jumping into the machine, Stevenson turns the key and fires her up. Wells steps forward, and Stevenson can see he's about to remove the vaporizing equalizer. He simply nods in resigned agreement, and with the part removed, he is dematerialized and cast into infinity. But what of Wells and Amy? Well, if you don't know and you want to know, then you'll just have to watch it or look it up online. That's as far as I go, Pilgrim. Originally, the studio wanted Mick Jagger to play the part of Wells, which, I must confess, is something I'd have paid good money to see. It might not have been any good, I might not have even liked it, but I'd have seen it, especially if Keith Richards had played Stevenson and Marianne Faithfull had played Amy. Well, can't always get what you want. Malcolm McDowell was born for the role, it's that simple. He channels a humanistic sense of childlike wonder, pain, disappointment, and gentlemanly decency in his portrayal, and simply nails it. Even if the real H.G. Wells was a bit of an adulterous bounder and male chauvinist. David Warner, likewise, as Wells' flip side, is an all-too-human Jack the Ripper, which only serves to make him more frightening and monstrous. He's like a gleefully vicious child let loose in an amusement park he could only have dreamed of. 90 years ago, I was a freak, he tells Wells. Today, I'm an amateur. As for Mary Steenburgen, she's attractively cute, sweet and kind as Amy, and her performance makes her relationship with Wells seem entirely credible, to the point where we feel her disenchantment and frustration when Wells tries to explain the reality of his situation, and she is crushed, believing in the moment that she's made another bad relationship choice, and this guy is just another nutbar out to trash her hopes and dreams. Mayer directs with a light and playful touch, but never lets things lapse into saccharine sentimentality. Keeping things tight, he references key elements from George Powell's The Time Machine from 1960, without overdoing it, and instead of Powell's stop-motion technique for representing time travel, goes with trippy 2001 style visuals backed by radio and TV audio broadcasts, advancing through the decades. It may look a bit ropey and Amdram standard FX now, but at the time it was fine enough. The score is one of the final works of composing maestro Miklos Rozsa, who did the music for Ben-Hur, the Chuck Heston classic. This is up there with his very best, and basing the pocket watch tune on Chant Dorvigne's The Spinner is thoroughly inspired. Cinematography by Paul Lohman, who worked on Robert Altman's Nashville and Mel Brooks' High Anxiety, is lively and stylish, transitioning seamlessly from Victorian England to late 70s San Francisco with hardly a bump in the road. Time after time is a carefully and enthusiastically crafted example of hybrid cinema, the sort that coalesces genres into a coherent whole and runs like clockwork. This is how you do it. A serial killer thriller, a detective story, science fiction yarn, historical drama, and a romance. Perhaps it shouldn't work, but it bloody well does. It's top fun, stimulating, satisfying and engaging entertainment from a time when it was still possible to get some quality with your popcorn. What more do you want? Travelling back in time myself, I mentioned earlier the Robert Bloch scripted Star Trek episode Wolf in the Fold. Why is it relevant? Well, way I see it, Stevenson, or Jack, is cast into the infinite depths of space and time at the end of Time After Time. In the future, when Kirk and company are boldly going and so forth, maybe Mayer intended to imply it's him, the disembodied Ripper entity, that the crew of the Enterprise encounter. Seems a likely possibility, considering Mayer was a Trek fanboy, and what with his subsequent involvement in the movie franchise. I'll leave you with that. No, don't thank me. It's a gift. Cheers as always for your time and attention. You've been a wonderful audience, I'd imagine. And if you've liked, let me know. If you didn't, let me know. If you want to comment, please do. And if you want to subscribe, I'd appreciate that no end. Gotta go now? Time? Well, it waits for no man. Shit!